السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله وكفى والسلام على عباده الذين اصطفى. أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والذين جاهدوا فينا لنهدينهم سبلنا. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. On the morning of the day of Badr, when Sayyidina Rasulullah and his companions, they marched out to meet the Quraysh. The two armies were lined up in arrayed against each other. And as the Muslims were about to go forth into the battle, Sayyidina Rasulullah he reached down and he picked up a handful of sand and pebbles. And he took that sand and pebbles and he cast it forth at the enemy lines. And some of the people who were in those enemy lines, later on they became Muslim, and they narrate that Allah Ta'ala showed them a miracle. That from that small handful of sand and pebbles, Allah Ta'ala made it reach each of the eyes of the people in an army of over 1,000. And Allah Ta'ala showed them many miracles on that day, culminating in a divine victory of a small group over a much larger force. That in worldly terms, in worldly considerations, should have won by all accounts, but they didn't. And Allah Ta'ala commemorated that verse, or commemorated that battle in the verse in Ali Imran when he said to the Prophet ﷺ, "O my beloved Rasul, وَمَا رَمَيْتَ إِذْ رَمَيْتَ وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ رَمَى." That you didn't throw when you threw, when you cast the sand and the pebbles, but Allah Ta'ala is the one who did it. This is the same ayah that these brave brothers facing down a genocide, facing down people that would wipe them out, that they say before they strike a blow against tyranny, because it reminds us of who's in control. It's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It reminds us that everything in this world is an expression of Allah Ta'ala's beautiful names and attributes. It reminds us that even though this world seems like it's in chaos, there's a divine order. Even though this world seems like it might be falling apart, everything is in the plan of Allah Ta'ala. But then it's up to us to understand that although everything is in the plan of Allah Ta'ala, we have to ask ourselves, what's my role in that plan? What's my part in that plan? What am I going to do for this struggle that has existed since the beginning of humanity? And the first thing we have to understand to deal with that question is that Allah Ta'ala is in complete control. Some Christians, they believe in a thing called process theology. And what is process theology? It's the idea that God is trying really hard to make the world the way it's supposed to be, but He just can't do it. A'udhu billah. He just can't do it, so we have to work to make His vision come true. And that's where you get this silly ideas of, conquering Jerusalem and rebuilding the temple and hastening the rapture and Jesus' return. And we're going to kill all these people, but it'll eventually be okay because our religious dogma tells us that it is. But as Muslims, we don't believe that. It's untenable. It's impossible to square that circle with Tawheed. Allah Ta'ala, He tells us in Surah Al-Buruj, which is a chapter about people who were oppressed, about people who were in a very similar situation to some of those folks that we've seen, the Shuhada in Gaza. He tells us about people who were oppressed and those who oppressed them and what's the consequences of that oppression. But Allah Ta'ala, before He starts talking about all of those stories, He mentions 3 oaths. He gives 3 oaths. And the first thing that He says is, وَالسَّمَاءِ ذَاتِ الْبُرُوجِ. He swears by the sky and the stars. Not just the stars, the constellations. And not just the constellations, Allah Ta'ala, He says buruj. It means these towering mansions of stars. Because for thousands of years, people have looked up at the sky and they've seen order. They've seen those beautiful constellations. You're able to predict where the stars are going to appear hundreds of years from now. You're able to calculate where those same stars appeared hundreds of years in the past. And they want that order from the heavens in their own life. The ancient Chinese, they called it the mandate of heaven. And Allah Ta'ala, when He swears by the sky and the stars that it possesses, Sayyid Qutb in the shade of the Qur'an, he says, it's as if He's asking you, أَأَنْتُمْ أَشَدُّ خَلْقًا أَمِ السَّمَاءُ بَنَاهَا? Are you stronger in creation or the sky? He built that. No, Allah Ta'ala, He has complete control. So if this is a surah about oppressed people and God has complete control, then the next question a person's going to ask is, well, why is this happening? Why is this happening to God's people? And then Allah Ta'ala, He gives another oath. وَالْيَوْمِ الْمَوْعُودِ. He swears by the promised day. Because it reminds us that this life, what's happening right now, this is not the end result. This is a proving grounds to see what will you do. This is a proving grounds to see what metal you're made out of. This is a proving grounds to see how are you going to react in such situations. And then Allah Ta'ala, He swears with shahidin wa mashhud, that He swears by the witness and that which is being witnessed. And some might say this is on the day of judgment when people will testify. Some might say that this is happening right now when people, they are witnessing these atrocities. The whole world sees it. The whole world is watching. And others, they say that this is Allah Ta'ala, that He's in complete control and He's seeing all of these things. And this right there, that's all we need from the surah, just to prove that Allah Ta'ala is in complete control. But this is not just a point of religious belief for us. This is something we're supposed to internalize. This is something we're supposed to live. And what happens when a Muslim realizes that Allah Ta'ala is in complete control? Then you become ibnul waqt. You become the son or the daughter of the moment that you live in. You live life to its fullest because you don't spend your life on autopilot worrying about what's going to happen in the future or having sorrow over everything that happened in the past. You live in that moment. What the scholars in Persian, they used to say, hosh dardam. Hosh dardam, it means that you live with every single breath, you're conscious and aware of it. Because that's what your life is made of. It's individual breath, so you have to use it to its fullest. And when you know that Allah Ta'ala is in control, then you can actually stop and live like that. That's why the awliya, la khawfun alayhim wa la hum yahzanun. The awliya, they're present with Allah Ta'ala. They don't grieve over the past. And they don't have fear for the future because they know that Allah Ta'ala al-Hakim, al-Adl, the just and wise, He's going to take care of everything. But then some of us might wonder, what about in times like this? In times like this, when you see all this chaos, how does that play out? And that leads us to the next point. The next point is that every single thing for a believer, when we recite this verse, وَمَا رَمَيْتَ إِذْ رَمَيْتَ وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ رَمَى, that you didn't throw when you threw, but Allah Ta'ala is the one who makes it come into reality. That you have an action, an intention that's rooted in your heart, Allah Ta'ala is the one who brings it into fruition in this world and the next. That when you understand that, then you realize everything is a manifestation, unimpeded, of Allah Ta'ala's beautiful names and attributes. One of the great scholars, Imam Shamsuddin al-Tabriz, he was the teacher of Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi. He was not just somebody who recited wise sayings or who said poetry. He was an alim, he was a scholar, and he was a muhaddith. And he once said, out of all the hadiths that I learned from Sayyidina Rasulullah sallam, there's only one hadith that I didn't understand. He said, which one is that? He said, ad-dunya sijnul mu'min, that this world is a prison for the believers. I said, why? It seems straightforward. He said, because everywhere I look, I see the mercy of Allah Ta'ala. Everywhere I look, I see the banquet of Allah Ta'ala's grace. And somebody can say, but how did he live his life? Did he just cover his eyes? Did he not look around and see what's happening? The answer is, of course not. The scholars in the past, they saw famine, they saw bloodshed, they saw war, they saw all these things. They didn't put their head in the sand. Imam Shamsuddin al-Tabriz, at the end of his life, he himself was murdered. But what enabled him to see the rahmah of Allah Ta'ala everywhere? It's what the scholars say, that he could see with two eyes. One eye seeing the outward form of things, and the other eye seeing the inward reality, the inward meaning of those things. Give you an example from the Sahaba Kiram, because the Sahaba, they saw things this way. That there was once one Sahabi, and he was sent by Sayyidina Rasulullah to give da'wah to a group of people. They invited them. They wanted to hear about Islam. So Rasulullah handpicked this Sahabi and sent him to them. He goes there, and he starts to address their majlis, their gathering. And as he's speaking to them, they were treacherous. They had one of their youths come behind him with a spear, and they stabbed him in the back. And this Sahabi, he looks down, he sees that he's dying. And with his dying breath, what does he say? He says, وَرَبِّ الْكَعْبَةِ أَنَا فَائِزٌ. He says, I swear by the Lord of the sacred house, I'm victorious. What gave him the presence of mind to see the end reality, the end result of these things in that moment? What enabled him? He didn't say, I'm a victim. He didn't say, I've been betrayed. He said, I am victorious 100%. The person who killed him, he was steeped in jahiliyyah. He didn't understand that. And he thought about it. He couldn't stop thinking about those words. They haunted him. He said, how is he victorious? I ended him. I ended his life. I'm the one who's victorious. But as one of the prisoners who came from the Israeli jails, when she came out, she was giving news media interviews and she was hugging her family. And she said, our people are a people who take pain and they turn it into miracles. The Sahabi, he saw the end result, the reality, he became shaheed. And the person who killed him, the more he thought about it, it forced him to learn about Islam. And then he became Muslim. And then he became shaheed. So you have these people from this horrible situation, from a sin, you have martyrdom, and from that sin you have sincere repentance, and you also have martyrdom. Kierkegaard, the Danish philosopher, he said that the death, it brings the end of the reign of tyrants, but that same death, it brings the beginning of the reign of the martyrs. And that's what you're seeing right now, is that these people are attaining the highest success. Don't take my word for it. Why did the Sahabi think that? Because he read the Qur'an. Because it's in Surah Al-Buruj. Allah Ta'ala, He gives those 3 oaths, and then He gives His verdict on the people who committed that crime where they dug a huge trench and they filled it with fire and they watched as the believers perished inside of it. What does Allah Ta'ala say? قُتِلَ أَصْحَابُ الْأُخْدُودِ. And don't we see the same thing when we look at the past 15 years, that you have all those people around the Gaza envelope, that when Israel would bomb those poor people, they would set up their lawn chairs on the hills around Gaza and they would clap and cheer as they watch these people perish. Right now you have IDF soldiers and they take pictures of their atrocities, and people back home in their country, the Zionist entity, they look at those videos and they cheer them on for those atrocities. They burn people with white phosphorus and their hellfire missiles. What does Allah Ta'ala say about that? إِنَّ الَّذِينَ فَتَنُوا الْمُؤْمِنِينَ وَالْمُؤْمِنَاتِ ثُمَّ لَمْ يَتُوبُوا فَلَهُمْ عَذَابُ جَهَنَّمْ وَلَهُمْ عَذَابُ الْحَرِيقِ. That if you thought you could play God in this world, and you thought you could play with people's lives and destroy their lives, then you'll meet God with a fire of an entirely different magnitude on the Yawm al-Qiyamah. That's what that is. And what does Allah Ta'ala say about those people who perished? That they preferred Allah Ta'ala to everything. That they believed in the truth and they were steadfast upon it. So what happened to them? They have jannat, they have gardens underneath which rivers flow. وَذَلِكَ الْفَوْزُ الْكَبِيرُ. And that is the ultimate victory. That's what lifts the veil off of our eyes so we can see the outward form of something, but also the inward meaning of it, the reality of it, the way that Sahabi saw it. Sayyid Qutb, he says it's amazing because in this surah you have 2 groups of people, but then Allah Ta'ala, He mentions 3 of His attributes. So one way that we see, that we witness these things, is that we look beyond it, not just seeing political results, that you have a group of oppressed people, but seeing the end result in the akhirah. But even further than that is seeing that Allah Ta'ala is manifested in each and every moment of our lives. So Sayyid Qutb says you have 2 groups of people, 3 outcomes. 3 names of Allah Ta'ala that are mentioned in the surah. Allah Ta'ala says, Inna batasha rabbika la shadid. And He says this ayah, this verse that says, indeed your Lord's punishment, it's stern. This applies to those people who oppress the believing men and women. But then He says in a later verse, وَهُوَ الْغَفُورُ, He's the most forgiving, and He's al-wadud, He's the most loving. He says, who are these attributes for? He says, you might think it's for the people who were thrown into the fire that God forgives them. And it's true that all of us need God's forgiveness. But He says, no, that can't be, because none of their sins are mentioned in the surah. No, that forgiveness is not for them. Who's the forgiveness for? It's for those people who committed that crime against them, but they made tawbah. Because Allah Ta'ala is even opening the door for these people who commit oppression. Because the real goal of our existence in this world is not to settle scores in the dunya. The real goal of our struggle is not revenge. The real goal is for people to simply realize the truth. Sayyidina Rasulullah during the Battle of Uhud, and the Muslims, they had a setback. And they were tending for their wounded back in Medina. And Sayyidina Rasulullah, his uncle, Sayyid al-Shuhada, Amir Hamza radiallahu anhu, he had been killed. And they were in pain and they were upset. And they could hear the kuffar outside of Medina. They brought wine and they brought women, and they were busy in their revelry over their victory. And the Sahaba, they turned to Sayyidina Rasulullah and they said, curse them, Ya Rasulullah sallam. Curse them. Sayyidina Rasulullah, he raised his hand and said, Ya Allah, forgive my people because they don't know. This is something that's hard for us. This is something that's difficult to think about because we just see these atrocities. People have no conscience. They're completely unaware. But that's the whole point, is that we can't get lost in those details. We have to see the bigger picture, and the bigger picture is, what is victory? إِذَا جَاءَ نَصْرُ اللَّهِ وَالْفَتْحِ وَرَأَيْتَ النَّاسَ يَدْخُلُونَ فِي دِينِ اللَّهِ أَفْوَاجًا. Victory isn't just a piece of land or the right to return to their homes, and that's their right. Victory isn't just conquering people on a battlefield. Victory is when people realize the truth. That's victory. So when those people repent, Sayyid Qutb, he's the one who says that forgiveness is for them. And then the third name that Allah Ta'ala mentions is Al-Wadud, the most loving. And when Allah Ta'ala mentions Al-Wadud, Sayyid Qutb, he says that the pen would hesitate to write any of this except that Allah Ta'ala said it. Because these people, what did they get from preferring Allah Ta'ala to everything else? They got the love of the Rabb, Rabbul Alameen, the Lord of all the worlds. He says this is the medicine for the heart. This is the healing balm that cures all wounds from this dunya. What did they achieve by their martyrdom? And what did their oppressors achieve by killing them? Their oppressors achieved nothing. They destroyed their own hearts. They ruined themselves. But those people, they got something that's a happiness everlasting that makes you forget about all the sorrows in this dunya. This is the reality that you're witnessing around you. I remember in 2008, when the first intensive bombing campaign happened on Gaza. And this was after they had started the siege, and the Israelis, they said that we're going to put them on a diet. We're going to limit their calories. You had stories about children picking through garbage to find food. And they started the bombing campaign. And I remember it was too much for a person to handle. This is after the invasion of Afghanistan. This is after Abu Ghraib. This is after Iraq. This is after Guantanamo Bay. And I went to the masjid and I cried. Can't help it. It's overwhelming. But now I don't cry anymore. I don't cry for those people because Allah Ta'ala, I cry for myself. That how can I catch up to the children of Gaza? That how high Allah Ta'ala elevated them, Allahu A'lam. That how far Allah Ta'ala took them, Allahu A'lam. That these are people who struggled for the truth and they died on that. We have to catch up to them. And that leads us to the third question, what are you going to do about it? Because Allah Ta'ala, He doesn't just say in Surah Al-Buruj, He doesn't just tell this account as a eulogy for people who are martyrs. He gives a warning to oppressors. That what does He say? In just 2 short ayahs, just asking a question. هَلْ أَتَاكَ حَدِيثُ الْجُنُودِ فِرْعَوْنَ وَثَمُودَ. Have you not heard of those armies of Fir'aun and Thamud? Just alluding to those stories in the Qur'an. Sayyid Qutb asks, why those 2 armies? Why those 2 out of all of them? He says, because Allah Ta'ala, in the case of the children of Israel, He gave His believers a perfect victory. They saw their tyrant perish in front of their very eyes. And they went on to establish their own society. And then in the case of Thamud, Sayyidina Salih and his band of followers, they were able to escape, but their society was destroyed. And when you take into account the story of the people of the pit of fire, that they became shuhada, he says these are the 3 outcomes that all believers face. They could achieve martyrdom in this life. They could achieve a complete victory over their enemies, or it could be anything in between those 2. But in every single case, what's the defining factor of what makes them victorious? It's their iman. وَأَنْتُمُ الْأَعْلَوْنَ إِن كُنْتُم مُؤْمِنِينَ. That you indeed have the upper hand if you are believers. That's the defining characteristic. That's what brings victory. And we know that we have to do something about the struggle, because that's what's really going to change things, is when people of conscience wake up and do something. Because if there was an international rules-based order, you wouldn't see the atrocities that you see in Gaza today. If there was an international rules-based order, you wouldn't see a genocide happening in front of your very eyes. If there was an international rules-based order, then you wouldn't have an occupation of these people. No. What has to happen is people have to, it's the same struggle of the people of Gaza, it's the same struggle of the people over here, it's the same struggle of Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it's the same struggle of every single one of those prophets that he led in Salah in Masjid al-Aqsa on the Isra and Mi'raj. And that struggle is to lift up and uphold the word of Allah Ta'ala. The word of Allah Ta'ala and the Sharia that says that human life is sacred. And it can't be violated. And it's been violated tens of thousands of times in the past 2 months. The Sharia that says that people's lineage, their children, their family, their nasl, it's sacred. And you have entire lineages wiped out. The Sharia that says that people's property is inviolable and these people have been dispossessed and they have the right to return to their homes. May Allah Ta'ala allow them to return to their homes. The Sharia that says that people's dignity, their ird, it's something sacred, and they've had their sacred dignity violated day after day for the past 75 years, for generations now. No, people have to stand up and they have to do something about it. But that struggle, it takes different forms in different times and different places. And those people over there are fighting for their lives so they can speak and point out about these struggles, so they can carry the deen, so they can pray in the masjid. That Allah Ta'ala says it's their right for every person who believes in the oneness of Allah Ta'ala that they can pray in the temple built by Abraham, rebuilt by Sayyidina Sulaiman alayhi salam, and rebuilt by the Muslims. May Allah Ta'ala reward them. You can't bar people from that. You can't put teenagers in jail because they pray salah. But what are you going to do about it? There was once a sheikh from Palestine. He was from Lid in the 1948 territories, and he came about 20 years ago. That was when I had just graduated from high school. Named Abu Salama, may Allah Ta'ala protect him. And Abu Salama, he came all the way from Palestine to talk to us and to tell us we have to carry the deen because people are prevented from praying in the masjid over there. People are prevented from basic freedoms. But you and I, we have this freedom, we have this ability to speak, to talk about the plight of those prisoners in those dungeons where their human rights are being abused, to talk about all of the horrible things that our government is paying for and sending those bombs over there. Our tax dollars, what are you going to do about it? I remember sitting with Sheikh Abu Salama and he held my hand, and I didn't know, he had very little English, but he was a very special person. But what did he do? He said that he was in Israel and he spoke to a group of Israelis. He's telling us this is our job because our people, they don't know. He said he was talking to a group of Israelis. He said, all I did was I went to the whiteboard and I wrote the Fatiha in Hebrew. I wrote the Fatiha in Hebrew. The entire group of people became Muslim there on the spot. All of them did. Because when people know the truth is irresistible. And you have the ability to tell the truth every single day. We're not fighting for a scrap of bread or to just get by and to survive another day. So what are you doing about it? What are you doing to catch up to those people, those martyrs of Gaza, the children of Gaza? What are you doing so that you don't just be like those people who sit and watch as the tragedies unfold? Allah Ta'ala says in Surah Al-Buruj, they sat by and watched these people die. Don't we all see it? But we have a responsibility to carry the deen in this day and age. We have the responsibility to teach people this deen. And if you think that you're too weak to do it, if you think that you're too insignificant, if you think that you can't make a difference, then you remember what Allah Ta'ala said, وَمَا رَمَيْتَ إِذْ رَمَيْتَ وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ رَمَى. That you didn't throw when you threw, but Allah Ta'ala is the one who throws. That you take a handful and you throw, Allah Ta'ala, He takes that action, that intention that's rooted in your heart, and He brings it into fruition. That you take one step, He takes two steps towards you. That you go to Him walking, He comes to you running. In reality, it's in the control of Allah Ta'ala. So you tap into that as a believer and you take action. And if you think calling your representative or your senator isn't going to matter, if you think going to a protest and talking about these truths is not going to matter, then you remember a hadith in Sahih Muslim where Allah Ta'ala is going to call the son of Adam. And He's going to say to him, "Oh son of Adam, I was sick and you didn't visit me." He say, "Ya Allah, how could I visit you? You're Rabbul Alameen, you're the Lord of the worlds." And then the hadith goes on, "I was hungry and you didn't feed me. How could I feed you? I was thirsty and you didn't give me to drink. How could I give you food and water? You're the Lord of everything." And then Allah Ta'ala is going to say that my servant so-and-so was sick, and if you had visited him, then you would have visited me. And so-and-so was hungry, if you fed him, you would have been feeding me. And so-and-so was thirsty, if you had given them water, you would have found me with my servant. We have no choice as Muslims. We have to do something. And Allah Ta'ala is going to count it. You have to stand with the oppressed. There's a saying in our deen that if anybody wants to be close to Allah Ta'ala, then you find a person with a broken heart, because Allah Ta'ala is with the brokenhearted. So stand with your brothers and sisters. Double down on this, because we know that Allah Ta'ala is in control. We know that everything is a manifestation of His attributes, but the question for us is, what are we going to do about it? May Allah Ta'ala give us tawfiq. May Allah Ta'ala give victory to our brothers and sisters. May Allah Ta'ala end their oppression. May Allah Ta'ala annihilate the kufr from the hearts of their their enemies. May Allah Ta'ala destroy their weapons of war and death machines that they use to kill innocent people and that are used to line the pockets of people in power in this country. May Allah Ta'ala give us all guidance that we stand with the people who are oppressed, and may Allah Ta'ala allow us to follow the life of a true believer. Wa akhir da'wana anil hamdulillah rabbil alameen.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله، أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله، أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله، أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. حي على الصلاة، حي على الصلاة، حي على الفلاح، حي على الفلاح. الله أكبر، الله أكبر، لا إله إلا الله.
الحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن سيدنا ومولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله. قال الله تعالى في كتابه العزيز: يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. وقال سيدنا رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم: اتق الله حيثما كنت، أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. بارك الله لنا ولكم في القرآن العظيم، ونفعنا وإياكم بالآيات وذكر الحكيم. أستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه، ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له، ومن يضلل فلا هادي له، ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، ونشهد أن سيدنا ومولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله، أرسله بالحق بشيرا ونذيرا بين يدي الساعة. من يطع الله ورسوله فقد رشد، ومن يعصهما فإنه لا يضر إلا نفسه ولا يضر الله شيئا. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ومولانا محمد عبدك ورسولك، وصل على المؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات، وألف بين قلوبهم وأصلح ذات بينهم، وانصرهم على عدوك وعلى عدوهم. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ومولانا وأزواجه وذريته. قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم: أرحم أمتي بأمتي أبو بكر، وأشدهم في أمر الله عمر، وصدقهم حياء عثمان، وأقضاهم علي، وفاطمة سيدة نساء أهل الجنة، والحسن والحسين سيدا شباب أهل الجنة، وحمزة أسد الله وأسد رسوله. اللهم اغفر للعباس وولده مغفرة ظاهرة باطنة لا تغادر ذنبا. الله في أصحابي لا تتخذوهم غرضا من بعدي، فمن أحبهم فبحبي أحبهم، ومن أبغضهم فببغضي أبغضهم. وخير أمتي قرني، ثم الذين يلونهم، ثم الذين يلونهم عباد الله رحمكم الله إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون اذكروا الله العظيم يذكركم ولذكر الله أكبر والله يعلم ما تصنعون وأقيم الصلاة إن الصلاة على المؤمنين كتابا موقوتا.
الله أكبر الله أكبر.